Okay, so welcome back to PsychoBible. I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and I've been wanting to do this video on Jordan Peterson for a while now. I've been, it's now been 2 years since, a little over 2 years, because he really broke onto the scene late September, and so now we're in near the middle/end of November. So it's just been maybe a couple of years and a month or so since the whole Jordan Peterson phenomenon has started. And so I want to talk about my experience with just the impression he's had on me, the influence he's had on me, as well as I have some footage from when I went to see him speak at on his 12 Rules for Life tour when he was in the Philadelphia area. And so I was able to record a little bit of that before I ran out of room on my phone. I was hoping to bring my camcorder in, but they didn't allow us to bring any recording devices, so I didn't have enough room on my phone to record the entire Q&A session. That's the only thing I could record. So for regular Jordan Peterson fans, you can skip ahead to that part. But if you're just new to Jordan Peterson, or you want a little bit of a refresher, or you're like, well, who is this guy everyone is talking about, or if you've been living under a rock, or you're not as plugged into YouTube land, I guess it's still possible you don't know who he is. He's made some mainstream appearances, but not as many as people who are plugged into YouTube realize. Like we tend to think that if someone is YouTube famous, that the general population knows who they are, but it's still not quite like that. So until you're a regular person on ABC, NBC, CBS, or they make a movie about you, like the general population still doesn't know who you are. So it's a little annoying because there's this whole movement going on, and I try to talk to people about it, and not everyone knows what I'm talking about. So it's a little annoying. So that's one reason why I've been doing these videos, because I want to start interacting with others who are aware of this stuff, or use it as an intro for people who aren't aware, so they can start to dialogue with me, because I feel sometimes like I'm the only one in my community who really is paying attention to these things happening in the culture. So that's why I want to do these videos. And I've been doing these videos on some of my key experiences in 2018. I did one on getting to see Jonathan Pajot speak, and so that was back in April, and then in May I got to see Jordan Peterson. So first, this will just be a primer for who is Jordan Peterson. Okay. Well, let me start with my life, my experiences right up to when I first discovered him. So as I had mentioned in other videos, and you can see also in one video of me doing a speaking engagement on sexual wholeness in a sexually broken world, I share my story a little bit in that video. And I am planning on doing a series of videos about my whole experience in college and graduate school. But my experience in graduate school was one in which I was discriminated against because of my views and my views on homosexuality, and my experiences in working with men who are leaving homosexual lifestyles or coping with unwanted same-sex attraction. And so, and that was actually something I was open about all throughout my graduate school experience. And even from the time of admissions, throughout different classes, when the topic would come up, I would share, well, here's my experience. This is actually some sort of work I do. So I was always honest about this. And yet, despite those efforts to be honest and protect myself through being honest, 4 weeks away from graduating, then I got an email from the head of the internship program that he now had become aware of my work in this field. which is actually a lie because I had mentioned it in his class that I took with him prior to doing my internship. So I'll get into that more in another video. Okay, so I ended up getting ousted 4 weeks away from graduating and had to transfer somewhere else. So I was very burnt by graduate school and the psychology field, but I managed to continue, get my degree, and begin work as a therapist. So all that happened in 2015, from end of June through November. That's how long this whole debacle lasted. And then I had to transfer somewhere else in the spring of 2016 and finish up all my coursework and then begin my work as a therapist. So I'm now several months into working as a therapist. Now I'm actually doing more work with guys with same-sex attraction, as well as other sexual issues or just other issues in general. And I forget where it was. I think on Facebook, I don't know which particular page, posted an article about this professor who made a video and started a bit of a ruckus on campus, or inadvertently. He made a video speaking out against a proposed bill in Canada called Bill C-16 that would, in effect, add to discrimination clauses gender identity and gender expression. Gender expression being the most ambiguous term. And so it would basically boil down to, at least what sparked him making this video, would be a requirement to refer to people by their preferred pronouns, or to speak about them using their preferred pronouns. And that would then have the force of law behind it. It wouldn't just be about, well, being polite to that person, but you'd be compelled. It was a compelled speech issue. And so he made a video objecting to this proposed bill and basically saying, I'm not going to do it. So I'll share a little bit from those videos, the very first ones. So I first heard about this professor through this article I read online, and I was like, wow, that is fascinating. It really spoke to me because, a couple reasons. One, because he's coming as a psychologist, and like I said, the world of psychology is super liberal and left-leaning. You don't find many, if any, conservative psychologists, and you get to know him more, and he's not even a true conservative. He's a classical liberal, which is interesting because when I was going through my discrimination, I made the case that you don't even need to be a conservative to empathize with me. Just any true liberal would understand where I'm coming from, and would, maybe if they disagree with my point of view or the work I'm doing, they would at least not see a harm in it, and would rather respect the rights of clients. So to obtain the type of therapy that they choose to obtain, and would just prefer to allow people to have free choice and free speech. Like, because these bans, these sort of therapy bans against therapy for unwanted same-sex attraction, they're a violation of free speech. And I think the conservative side needs to make that their main argument. We're making so much about freedom of religion, and that is important, but what undergirds freedom of religion in America is free speech, and that enables us to then be able to have the freedom. Well, they kind of coincide. So anyway, it's all in the same Bill of Rights. But you can make a secular argument for the protection based off just free speech. So I would make the case that you don't even need to agree with me to believe I should have the right to offer this type of counseling for people who want it. And I've had some friends tell me that they shared my story with other friends who are liberal or pro-gay, And they're like, no, yeah, this is wrong. He's being discriminated, and that's not right. The way in which he's being discriminated. So that's where he's coming from as a classical liberal. That people should just have more freedom, and you shouldn't be controlling people's speech. So it's just it seems like the hill he's dying on is transgender issues, but it's not so much about being any sort of animosity toward transgender people. It was just that what he now come to term he has now come to term the postmodern neomarxists. He's sort of identified that there's the postmodernists and the neomarxists have married in this way. So we just sort of, at this point, if you're paying attention to cultural war, you're using some of the terms that he coined and forgetting that it's only been a couple of years since those have entered the common vernacular, or at least for those of us who care about these issues. So that stood out to me, that here's a guy in psychology, the super liberal left-leaning psychology, who is speaking out about this stuff. And after me being discriminated against in a psychology world, that was a breath of fresh air. Like, it really made me stand up, and sit up and listen and be like, whoa, who is this guy? And then, as well, he's from Canada, which, for conservative Christians, we've always looked at Canada as being a harbinger of things to come in the U.S. because they're way more liberal traditionally than the U.S. I mean, we remember years ago, I think in the 90s, early 2000s, there was a pastor who was arrested for speaking out against homosexuality in his church. So there were the seeds being planted early on of tyrannical, what I would call homofascism, or LGBT. It's not even activism anymore, it's totalitarianism. So the whole LGBTQ community, or the rights, the agenda around there, is not about protection anymore, or about equal rights. It's about literally trying to control what people think about the issue. So Canada has always been more liberal and more leftist, according to people from my point of view. So he's a psychologist, and he's Canadian, and he's talking about these issues. That made me pay attention. So I want to share some of the videos, some of the early stuff, so you can get a little bit of an idea of where he was coming from and what the response was. It was quite amazing. All right, so here's the very first video he ever did on Professor Against Political Correctness. This is where he first laid out his thoughts on Bill C-16. All right, I'm just going to play part of it.
So I've been informed about a couple of things this week that have really been bothering me. And I thought that I wasn't sure what to do about it. I've been communicating with some of my friends and colleagues about it, but that wasn't enough. So I thought I'd try to write my thoughts down and then talk about them a little bit and see where I got with that. So I've entitled this talk Professor Against Political Correctness. And the reason for that is because it's blunt and to the point. I'm very concerned about what's happening in the universities. It's not so bad in Canada. I've been very fortunate at the University of Toronto, but there are continually things happening, including in the administration here and in the broader political world, that make me very nervous. I like to attribute that to the fact that I know something about the way that totalitarian and authoritarian political states develop, and I can't help but think that I'm seeing a fair bit of that right now. So I guess I also wanted to do this because there's a misapprehension that everyone in academia is politically correct, and that is true. very frequently among social scientists, about 20% of whom identify themselves as Marxists, which in my estimation, by the way, is no better than identifying as Nazis, given the murderousness of the Marxist doctrine and the fact that we know how it's turned out when implemented in multiple countries now. But I'm not politically correct. And I want to talk to you today about why all this worries me. So I got wind of two events this week. One actually dates from last May. There was a legislation passed, or the first reading of legislation in the federal House in Canada about a bill called C-16, which is an attempt to alter the Canadian Bill of Human Rights. It's tangled up with another organization that operates at a provincial level in Canada, in Ontario, which is the province I reside in, called the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And as far as I can tell, what happens at the Ontario Human Rights Commission is rapidly turned into policy in multiple provinces across Canada, and perhaps increasingly at the federal level. There's a Liberal government in power. That's the name of the political party in Ontario, and now there's a Liberal government federally, and there's obviously a fair bit of cross-influence, for better or for worse. Also this week, I got wind of a University of Toronto human resources initiative that also upset me, I guess we could say, quite profoundly. And so I thought I'd talk about all of those and try to see if I could make some sense out of them. So I'm making this video because I don't really know what else to do. I've talked to some colleagues, and I've talked to some colleagues or some people inside the university and outside the university that I know, and they're upset and worried about this, but unclear about what to do. And all of this scares me, I guess, and here's why. The changes to the law scare me because they put into the legal substructure of the culture certain assumptions about basic human nature that not only do I believe to be untrue, I think they're also dangerous and ideologically motivated. I also don't think that the reason for the legal changes is the stated reason. The laws scare me. The doctrines behind the laws scare me. When there's a law, there's a body of thought that's associated with it, a body of interpretations that are associated with it that flesh out the law, because the law is a pretty bare thing. And I've read, I wouldn't say extensively, because extensively is a lot, but I've read enough about the doctrines behind the laws so that has also makes me very nervous. Increasingly, I see that these more radical ideas, the ideas that we're going to discuss, are bought in. People buy in at the administrative level in large organizations, corporate, governmental. It doesn't matter. As long as the organization is large, there's increasing administrative buy-in. A lot of this seems to me to be driven by human resources departments, which I think are generally the most pathological elements of large organizations. And I say that because I've actually had fairly extensive experience dealing with human resources departments. I think HR training is very politically correct, like many disciplines. We'll talk about that later. The people behind the doctrines also scare me. I think that generally they're a very bad combination of resentful, uninformed, and that's good enough. Resentful and uninformed, that's good enough. I also think that their aims are destructive rather than constructive. They claim constructive aims, but of course everyone claims constructive aims, but the actions that I see undertaken seem to be driven by resentment, and primarily by resentment. And so I doubt the validity of the claims. The claims are always for equality and diversity and that kind of thing. And those words are very easy to say, but a lot harder to put into practice. So I'm scared by the people behind the doctrines.
So he makes this video and he lays out his arguments for where this bill will lead. And he takes a look at the bill itself. He looks at the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and he puts the pieces together and realizes here's how this bill will be reinforced, even to the point where he thinks it may even be illegal for me to even make this video and even to discuss these ideas. And subsequently, there was a bunch of ruckus on campus over his video. He made a series of videos about this stuff, and it started to spread, and students got real riled up about it, and things kind of reached a boiling point. And then on top of it, the administration at the school, the HR department, and the other higher-ups sent him letters pretty much telling him to stop. It was like a cease and desist. And part of that was because in the Bill C-16, it considers any organization also liable for the speech of their employees. So they would be responsible for him speaking about this stuff. So they pretty much told him as well, be quiet. And a third letter would have got him fired. So he got 2. So it just really reached had a huge response. There's clearly some things that he was saying that were resonating with people as well as offending people. So here's just a snippet from he did a free. There was a rally or a demonstration or a protest, and he spoke at it. I don't think he was the organizer necessarily, but he spoke at it to share about free speech. And of course, the social justice warriors come out in force. And so here's a snippet of what was said at the confrontation, and how they try to twist his words and blame him for violence being committed against transgender people.
Just wanting to make sure that you knew that's why that was.
I'm perfectly aware of it.
I have a calm, rational question.
Okay.
I won't get emotional with you. So, who is this legislation harming? Who is
Harming anybody who wants to use their own words.
So, in what capacities? Be specific.
And look, it's important that people are able to use their own words.
Okay.
Because that's how we think. And if
So-
the government starts legislating how we think...
So if I wanted to call you she, I'm playing off of what you're saying. If I wanted to call you she and her and miss, because that's my freedom of speech, and if everyone just called you that all the time, and that was the only thing.
Can't you tell?
I think that you don't care because you've never had to face that. And it's a common trend among people who have never had to face like transgender related discrimination that you think it's not a big deal because you don't have to deal
I
with
didn't
it.
say I didn't think it was a big deal. I said I didn't care if people told me that.
Public institutions, but it does prevent us from accessing healthcare. It does prevent us from accessing other services.
I'm not arguing about your rights.
Yes, you are.
C-16 is about our rights.
Legislation for trans.
I'm sorry, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you realize that right now, if you were to kill a trans person, because only for the sole reason that they're trans, that would not be considered a hate crime. Sure, they could be convicted of murder, but not of a hate crime. And that's what this
I don't
bill,
see what
that's
this-
what,
what-
that's
Actually,
what
back in the
this,
States, they can use a trans status as
Yeah,
an almost
yeah.
law in the United States and get off by claiming temporary insanity because they were freaked out by the trans person.
I am not claiming for a moment that people who don't fit into standard and traditional sexual categories or sexual identity categories
This is
don't
about gender.
face all sorts of trouble. They do. I just don't think that this is the way to fix it. In fact, I
You
think
do not a law that legislates protections from discrimination for trans people.
not
It's
this
a way to do nothing.
That's right. I don't think
Have you read the laws are intentionally worded?
bring as many
Most
people-
laws involving
cause
human
as
rights.
much trouble to as many people as possible.
What would we gain from that?
There's a conspiracy of
I didn't say it was a conspiracy.
There is a concentrated effort behind these bills in order to specifically make the lives of people worse, and that's why we create human rights legislation to make it.
I think
harder
that
for
people.
to
I think that people often do things.
So that's just a snippet. And if you think that was bad, that's nothing compared to once he got more known and would do more speaking engagements. It's just the protests would follow him, and they would get increasingly more violent. Look up the one where he spoke at McMaster's University and Queens College. The protests there were insane. So, yeah, the response against him has been huge. so there's that going on. I was picking up on some of that, but I want to share some clips from. There's an interview he did with Dave Rubin early on in this whole debacle. That was one of the first videos I really saw with him, because I had to go back and watch some of this other stuff. So it was really my intro to Jordan Peterson when I went online and saw some of his videos. And it was this interview where you really get to understand what it is that drives him. Like in the first part of the video, yes, he shares about Bill C-16, his concerns. You can watch that stuff. But the last half of this interview, you really see that he's not objecting to this compelled speech legislation for in any sort of arbitrary reason or prejudice. It becomes quite clear he's objecting based on principles, and he really lays it out for philosophical and just ethical principles that he is standing on here. And watch his responses, the way he really delineates his reasoning. Makes it. This was what inspired people. There's this interview. There's also a similar interview with Joe Rogan on his podcast. Now that interview is way longer, but this one is short enough that it really just is a great introduction to him. So I'm going to play some clips from that really impacted me.
So how do we untangle some of this stuff for all of the well-intentioned SJWs that I talk about all the time, that you talk about all the time, for all of the people that are enamored with the safe spaces and trigger warnings and that think that they're doing good? Because I don't
buy that. I don't believe the good intention idea.
Really? Please take it away.
Because
this part's amazing because it's so easy to think, well, these people just are really compassionate. They really, whether they're activists, they're trans people themselves, or they're just allies, that the reason why they're fighting for this stuff is just out of compassion. And it's really easy to think that way. And I was pleasantly surprised when Dr. Peterson really lays out an argument for why that he doesn't buy that at all. And it shows his worldview very clearly in the next this whole discourse he gets into.
like many terrible things have been done in history in the name of good intentions. And why should I assume that just because someone states they have good intentions, that their intentions are actually good? No, that's predicated on the idea that people are intrinsically good. And I don't buy that for a second. People are intrinsically good and evil.
Oh, that was awesome. Like, that just shows, when you watch enough of his videos, you know that he's a humanist in the sense that he cares about humanity. Like, he debates against antinatalists, people who think that humans should stop giving birth to more humans because life is too full of suffering and we do more harm than good. Like, there's David Benatar that he's done a debate with. And so, and he speaks a lot about nihilism. So he cares about humanity, and he really believes that we are the apex of creation or evolution. He's still an evolutionist. Probably my one main beef with him. But he cares about humanity, but right there it shows he's not a humanist in the traditional sense, where they believe that people are basically good and we only get corrupted by society. Like, and it's funny he says this because when I was in grad school, in one of my courses, we were talking about it was in my theories of counseling course, and I think we were talking about psychodynamic theory, and the discussion was about or we were getting in, I forget, one of my classmates said, well, you know what, we just basically, people forget that we're basically still animals. And, you know, trying to make the case that that's why humans do bad things, because we're still animals. And I was just like, I gotta disagree with you there. It's like, we're made in the image of God, but we're corrupted. So we're both basically good and bad. And, you know, God's plan of redemption is to redeem us out of, to bring us out of that control of our shadow side or our dark side or our sinful nature. So I took the opportunity there in grad school to pretty much share the gospel, and it really impressed my professor, who's this super liberal Jewish lady. So she's like found that remarkable, but I made the case. It's like, no, we're not basically good and we're not basically evil. We're both, because we still have a little bit of the image of God in us. Now that's going to rub some Calvinists the wrong way, of course, because they would say no human could do any good unless God makes them do good or compels them in some way. But I'm like, it doesn't matter if you got a little bit of evil in you. That's enough to make you a lawbreaker. So I don't think it's necessary to say that we are 100% depraved, and in order to say that we're all in need of salvation. Anyway, so he just pretty much echoed my own words right there. I love that. So,
and you cannot take someone's intentions, especially their political intentions, especially if they have to do with changing others. You can't take that at face value. And I think that you can understand the politically correct types very well if you substitute resentment for the word compassion. Every time they use compassion, you substitute resentment, and you've got a pretty good sense of exactly what they're up to. And the idea that you're doing people a favor by making them safe it's the proposition that Sigmund Freud spent his whole life fighting against, because the classic Oedipal mother who devours her children like the witch in Hansel and Gretel, feeds them nothing but candy and fattens them up so she can eat them. That's a cautionary tale for our time, I tell you. Is those people say, well, I did it with the best intentions. All I was trying to do was protect my children. It's like, children aren't there to protect. Children are there to encourage and toughen. And so the idea that this is good intentions, no way, man. I don't buy it for a second.
Yeah,
good intentions.
Yeah, I guess I would give a little caveat to what I said, which is that I think for the most part, the young people that are getting indoctrinated with this stuff, when they hear about it, I think their intentions are to do good. I think the leaders of a lot of these movements and the higher up academics and things like that, they really understand what's going on and realize how this is about power. No?
I don't buy it with the young people either. And the reason for that is, like, Carl Jung talked about the unholy alliance that an Oedipal mother formed with her child. So if your mother is very, very hyper-dependent, there's two things you can do about it. You can rebel against it, or you can take the offering. And the advantage to taking the offering, the alliance is basically, you never leave, and I'll never require that you do anything. Right. That's the mother with the hyper-dependent child. Okay, so how do you translate that into a political agenda? It's easy. I'm going to teach you a political ideology, and it'll put you in a position of moral superiority, and it will require absolutely no responsibility whatsoever on your part, and you'll be able to demonize and victimize people and have a place where you can vent your resentment and spleen. And so that's what's happening with the young people. And I mean, I don't want to be over categorical about it. I know that people get confused, but I don't think that there's any excuse for it. And I think that there's a corruption in the idea that what I should do as a political agent is change you, or even change the world. It's like, if you want to take and you want to say against the corruption of the world, then you should start by fighting against the corruption in your own heart. And that's a real battle. And that really requires responsibility. You should discipline yourself. You should get rid of your fear. You should expand your skills. You should stop being an uncarved block. And you should stop being pathetic. You should start being attractive to people of the opposite sex. You should sharpen yourself up. And you should have enough humility to know bloody well that when you're 18 years old, you don't know enough about the world to go out and radically reshape it. So they're being sold a bill of goods. There's no doubt about it. But the reason that it's so pernicious is because it appeals to the most hypocritical and deceitful and responsibility-shedding element of young people. And of course, it's hard for young people to discipline themselves. And it's a long way up back into the middle class, So there's a real struggle that requires responsibility and courage to place yourself in the world as a productive citizen. It's a hell of a lot easier just to abandon that and complain about the entire structure of society.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't think we were going to go exactly in this direction with this, but you're really giving the best argument for liberty and for individualism over collectivism, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to jump ahead a few points as well.
I don't like to make this comparison, but there was no courage on the part of the intellectuals when the Soviets started to dismantle universities. There was no courage among the academics when the Nazis started to do the same thing in the 1930s. And it's the same process. I mean, I'm not trying to draw a direct equivalent, but it's the same process. It requires almost no pressure to intimidate people into silence. But that's because people aren't afraid enough. You know, people have been asking me how I can tolerate the stress. It's like, first of all, compared to real stress, a sick child, that's stressful.
Mm-hmm.
This is a...
Now that this was early on in our introduction to Dr. Peterson, now we know that if you've been following him any amount of time, you know what he's referring to there is his daughter, all throughout childhood and into young adulthood, had a really bad autoimmune disease. She had, by like what? Her adolescence, like 3 hip surgeries or hip replacements. It was insane. All the stress they went through and constantly trying to figure out the right treatment, right diet. That's just been an insane battle. And he also had, him and his wife both have autoimmune disease. So he's really speaking from experience there about comparing the stress of potentially losing his job over him speaking out against this issue and the stress of his daughter's sickness. So it's interesting to watch this now, 2 years later, with that insight.
Political argument. What's on the line is my job. Like that's not a tragedy. It sucks and it's stressful, but I mean, compared to genuine stress, it's nothing. But compared to the stress that I would be under if I agreed to use this language. See, for me, the real issue for me personally is that I believe that these made-up gender-neutral pronouns are part of the radical dialectic of the PC authoritarian left. I think they're carefully crafted terms. I think they have intent behind them, and they're part and parcel of an ideology. And I dread and despise that ideology to the bottom of my soul. And there's not a chance I'm going to use those words because I would literally destroy my integrity. And I'm not doing that. I can't think of anything that would be worse for me than that. It would break me.
Yeah, and I love that passion, and it's so obvious how personal this is to you. I'm curious, what do you think is it about you that is willing to put this? I get what you're saying, it would hurt you to your core, but I just mean, like, what about your maybe formative years or something that you're the one that's putting yourself on the line for this? And I know there are a couple up there, there's my friend Gad Sad, who I know you've talked to, who's in academia in Canada, who talked about this stuff. And I know I have a few allies in the United States really protecting free speech. And then they're growing, by the way, which is why so many people wanted me to talk to you. But what do you think really is it about you that makes you say, I will put my ass on the line for this?
Well, I published a book in 1999 called Maps of Meaning. And the course lectures about that are on my video channel. And I wrote Maps of Meaning because I was absolutely obsessed with what had happened in Nazi Germany and in the Soviet Union. And I mean, I really, truly mean obsessed. I spent virtually every waking second for 15 years thinking about nothing else than that, and read very, very, very widely. I read all of Carl Jung. I read Orwell and Huxley and Solzhenitsyn and a slew of books on neurobiology and all the great clinical psychologists and a huge chunk of political economy. And I read a very, very vast amount of psychological and political literature. And I synthesized this over the course of 15,000 hours. That's how long it took me to write that book. And the reason I did it was because I was trying to understand the relationship between belief and emotion and motivation. And more specifically, I'll tell you a story. Here's what I was trying to understand, right? So one of the tricks that the guards used to pull in Auschwitz was that when the prisoners or the detainees were dumped off the rail cars where they'd been packed in like sheep, worse than sheep, and where many of them died of suffocation and dehydration and overheating when they were dumped off at the camp. And they were ruined by then already because, you know, they'd been ripped away from their families and had their lives destroyed. But that wasn't good enough for the Auschwitz guards. And one of the tricks they used to pull on them was they'd have the inmates pick up a 100-pound sack of wet salt and carry it from one side of the compound to the other, and then back. And so it said on the Auschwitz gates, "Work will make you free," which was a joke, a black joke, a joke from the depths of hell, that like mutual assured destruction, the same kind of humor. And I was very interested in. I thought, okay, an Auschwitz guard could take someone who was already ruined, who lost their family, was suffering dreadfully, and then make them do something effortful and terrible. Because these camps were big. To carry the sack of salt from one side, that's a city. These were cities. These weren't like little prisons. Mm-hmm. And it was to demonstrate to the person their absolute abject humiliation and to deprive them of any sense of accomplishment whatsoever that they might extract from their labor. Okay, so I was interested in that, but I was interested in why a human being would do that to another human being. But I was interested in that in a very particular way, because you see, the people in Auschwitz who were the guards, they were ordinary people. And that meant that ordinary people can do that. And that meant I could do it. And so I wanted to figure out just exactly what that meant. And so I did figure out what that meant. You know, Jung said that the human shadow stretches all the way down to hell. And that's exactly right. It's really directly true. And so I realized that when I was writing Maps of Meaning, after some experiences I had also visited is more the accurate term, but I worked for this strange psychologist in Edmonton who was the prison psychologist at the Edmonton Maximum Security Prison. And I went out there a few times and observed the convicts and started thinking about what motivated them too. And, you know, I had a revelation not long after that about atrocity. And the revelation was, because I didn't think I was capable of doing such a thing, but I thought about it a long time and I realized I was bloody fully capable of it. And so then I started to puzzle out, given the human capacity to do that, and maybe even to revel in it, maybe even to enjoy it, what can possibly be done? And you know, people often perform that sort of atrocity under the guise of ideological commitment. Well, I'm persecuting the Jews because I'm actually a really good guy. Here's what I want. Here's my good intentions.
Right.
You know, here's my good intentions, and they just happen to be collateral damage. And so it's actually moral and ethical that I'm doing this. But really, they're just taking the opportunity to act out their deep hatred of being and hatred of reality and contempt for humanity. Well, I wrote Maps of Meaning in an attempt to understand that motivation and to determine what people could do so that if the opportunity arose once again, each individual would not choose to be an Auschwitz camp guard.
All right, so there's a few things that stood out to me. Like, he had been thinking about this stuff for years. He was primed and ready to go to talk about where things were going with political correctness and authoritarian, like Marxism and postmodernism. And he was a student of Cold War and Nazism, and he knew that what led to those ideologies, and he cared deeply about these things. So that was really telling me he was making his stand based off principles. And a couple other things stood out to me. He quotes Jung quite a lot, which I became a fan of Carl Jung when I was in high school, when I was a sophomore, and I read Man and His Symbols, because I was, as an artist, I wanted to marry my two loves, artwork, doing art, and psychology, and I wanted to be an art therapist. And so I was in my sophomore year, I was doing a psychology course, and for my term paper, I wrote this huge paper. It was like I was sophomore year of high school, and I wrote like a 20-page paper on art psychology. And so I read a lot of Jung for that paper, and so I fascinated by the work he had done and his thought. And it bothers me because today the main model in psychology is cognitive behavioral, which is great, but there's like this enmity between CBT and psychodynamic, and there's a lack of appreciation for Freud and Jung, and so it's really hard to find people who really appreciate the psychoanalytic tradition. So when I find someone who actually cares about that stuff, that really fascinates me. So that stood out to me. And then a couple other things that happened in this interview is he quotes the Bible. So maybe you start to wonder, okay, is he a Christian? And still a bit of a question. But he at least has a deep respect for Christianity and views it as fundamental to our Western civilization. And so as you can see, he talks a lot about speaking the truth. And I recently wrote my story out to be published in the Journal of Human Sexuality. And I was asked what advice I would give to grad students, especially those who may be in danger of facing discrimination like I faced. And my advice was fairly simple, and it was speak the truth. And it was what I had been living my life on, especially all through my grad school career. And so for me, encountering Jordan Peterson just helped reinforce this even more and gave me more ammunition. So I'm probably going to do even more videos just about this topic, but this is so fundamental to what he speaks about. So if you start getting into Jordan Peterson videos, or you just want to know what is it he's really about, what is his message, the next couple clips really do boil it down. And there's some other really good interviews out there. I'll put the links in the description. There's a really long form interview he did with Dr. Oz, of all people, who I guess is now a Jordan Peterson fan. And it's really well done and really helps lay out everything he teaches. He kind of beats a dead horse, but he's got a message, and he talks about it all the time. He has no problem talking about it. So that's another video that if you want to learn more about what he speaks about and what he believes and what he teaches, that's another one to look at. So, but here is just thinking about this going back a couple years. This is my first introduction to him, and it really made me admire the guy. So
what can we all do to make sure that as the choices come to us, whatever they may be, that we don't do the horrible thing?
Well, a lot of people have thought through this. Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, he came to a particular conclusion, and so did Dostoevsky, so did Alexander Solzhenitsyn, so did Václav Havel, who was the dissident, Czech dissident, who eventually became president. They all said the same thing. Those systems exist because people lie. And the way you fight them is you don't lie. You don't lie about anything ever. And so that's what you do. And you think, well, how can that make a difference? Well, Solzhenitsyn wrote the Gulag Archipelago in the 1970s, and he detailed the transformation of the Marxist philosophical doctrine into the murderous legislation that killed perhaps 50 million people in the Soviet Union between 1919 and 1959. Said the entire society was pervaded by lies. Well, 1/3 of the people were government informers. You could never say anything that you believe to be true. And it doesn't start by people directly lying. It starts by people muffling themselves because there are certain things you can no longer say. Mm-hmm. And you demolish your character, you weaken your character through sins of omission, and you get weak. And as soon as you're weak, people can manipulate you like mad. And so the way you fight back against totalitarianism is that you tell the truth and you act out the truth, your truth, and you subject yourself to correction from other people, because the truth is a process, right? It's a process of successive approximation. And that's far more powerful than anything else you can do.
It's interesting. I'm curious, do you think the average person is actually starving for truth? Really, I don't mean like human truth of the origins of the universe, although many of us are, but I mean just simple truths about how our politicians operate, how our lives operate, our day-to-day truths, because I find all the time people will email me and say, it's so great what you're doing and free speech and all this stuff. And my response to everybody is I don't think I'm doing anything that great other than telling the truth the way I see it. I'm trying to use logic and reason to talk to people I find interesting, to learn and expand my knowledge. And that's my quest for truth. And I think people have been so dumbed down that they're almost afraid of finding it because the system has just rewarded idiocy in a way.
Yeah, well, people, it says in the New Testament that man does not live by bread alone. And that's a technical commentary on the utility of the truth. The truth is, you could say, spiritual food. And I use that metaphor purposefully. You live on information. You're a cognitive apparatus. You live on information, and in information, you transform information into the tools you use to operate within the world. And if your tools are faulty, then your life will be terrible. If you're fed on a diet of deceit, then you'll be pathological in everything you do, and the world will kick back at you extraordinarily hard. The first thing it'll do is deprive you of any sense of meaning, and then it'll make you bitter, and then it'll make you resentful, and then it'll make you murderous, and then it'll make you genocidal. That's the developmental pathway. And those kids, the people who shoot up the high schools, they've already hit murderous. They're nigh on the way to genocidal. And part of the reason is that a life that's characterized by nothing but deceit has no positive meaning in it, but plenty of suffering. Because you can lie to yourself and you can lie to other people, but the probability that you're going to be able to talk yourself out of your terror and pain is zero. And as far as I can tell, truth is the only genuine antidote to suffering. Because getting rid of suffering, that isn't going to happen. The only thing you can do is live in a manner that enables you to withstand suffering without becoming corrupt. And that means that you live by the truth, and no matter what. And then there's a coda that goes along with that, which is something that took me decades to understand, is that Kierkegaard talked about this a fair bit when he talked about the leap of faith necessary for true religious belief. Said, telling the truth is it's a gamble on the benevolence of being. So the idea is, well, you tell the truth. You don't manipulate the world to make it give you what you want. You just say what you try to articulate yourself and articulate the manner of your being as clearly and comprehensively as possible. And then you see what happens. And you decide, this is the act of faith, you decide that no matter what happens, if you tell the truth, that's the best possible outcome. And the thing is that at the bottom of your being, there's always a decision that has to be made about how you're going to interact in the world. Because you have free choice, whatever that means. You seem to have it. And so you have to make a decision about how it is that you're going to act in the world. And you act in truth if you can. That's the pathway out of the kind of misery that makes people bitter and far worse than bitter.
Now, Dave was on to something there with the hunger that people have for truth. And you see it in the response that Dr. Peterson got. And just so many interviews, people wanting to see him, so many people taking clips from his lectures and posting them. And then, like I said, you'll notice he quotes scripture. And if you watch his lectures that he has on YouTube of his courses that he taught on maps of meaning, as well as his personality course, he'll reference the Bible and Christianity, and you see a deep respect for the archetypes, the symbols in Scripture. So what was really fascinating is, like, he's got all this buzz around him, and what is his follow-up? After so many months of this controversy and this buzz, and his follow-up was, he said, I'm going to do a lecture series on a psychological interpretation of the Bible. Like, where did that come from? But it really goes back to, he really believes a solution to the culture war that we're in, to the attack on free speech and the attack on our basic beliefs as a Western society, is a return to our Christian roots and the Judeo-Christian ethic and a deeper appreciation for the stories within Christianity. I think he truly believes that. And so, and he sees great value in these myths. Like they lasted so long. And he uses myth not in a derogatory term or pejorative, but with deep respect, that if it's a myth, that it must be important. It was passed down for a reason. And so he comes what we call like a bottom-up approach, kind of through general revelation, a way of explaining Scripture. But he's not entirely, he makes it clear, he's not entirely ruling out revelation. But he makes clear, I'm just sticking to a psychological interpretation of these things. So he does this. He starts, sometime summer 2017, and he ended around April or March of 2018. He did 12 lectures, like about one a month or so, on Genesis. He wanted to get through the entire Bible. He could barely get through Genesis. So he's still supposed to continue this project. He wants to do it the rest of his life. He's been busy now with his book tour, because while he was doing those lectures, he also is finishing up his second book, which is 12 Rules for Life. So this is his current bestseller. And like David said, people are hungry for truth. This book is selling out like hotcakes, and he's doing this book tour, which is really more of like an evangelical crusade, where he's getting to preach his worldview. And it started this whole phenomenon. And what I've been seeing is where if you're just a Christian who is not plugged into the culture as well, you might be operating off of an outdated paradigm where the atheists are running the show, and but if you've been paying attention to some things, you'll realize there's a growing movement of, largely thanks to Jordan Peterson, of these atheists and agnostics starting to now, mostly because of a reaction against the postmodern Marxists, we're now finding allies within the atheist community that I'm surprised we're seeing, but they're starting now to appreciate Christianity. So that's a growing movement. It was happening before Jordan Peterson, but it's growing more now, and I'm starting to see through the message boards and the comment threads online, atheists now starting to, maybe I'm agnostic now. I gave up on church. I didn't think it was very deep, but now through his lectures, I'm thinking there's a lot more to Christianity. Maybe I had an immature view of Christianity in the Bible. I'm going to look into it more. So, and they're starting to realize there's some value in applying the principles. So now you got this whole movement that's been growing of atheist Christians, or rather Christian atheists. They're still atheists or agnostics, but they see the value in Christianity and they're living out Christian principles, or attempting to. Now, I have some theories on where this is going as a subculture, but I just find it fascinating. Like, hey, they may not be fully there yet, but they're on their way. And Peterson is someone who is still seeking truth. He will often, when he's asked questions about God or the Bible or Christianity or what he believes about the resurrection, he takes those questions serious, and he'll be honest, I'm still thinking about it. I haven't made up my mind. But he is definitely a seeker of truth. And he's getting other people to start reconsidering. People who gave up on church, gave up on Christianity, and just discounted it, they're starting to reconsider. And I'm seeing this growing movement back to Christianity within the atheist community. And it's fascinating. And I wish more Christians were aware of it, and more churches were aware of it, and trying to see what sort of spaces within their churches they can open up for intellectual conversation, so that there's a home for these people who want to have a deeper conversation about God and about religion and faith. So he's starting something, and it's really passionate, and so that people are going on this journey with him. So this last clip, I have to play. It is a capstone to this interview, and it really shows his heart.
For all the people that are watching this right now, that understand this, that hear you, that understand the passion, that want to live that way too, how can they get involved in this process? Is it simply just doing?
I can tell.
Yeah.
I can tell you. All right. So most of your viewers will have watched Pinocchio.
Probably.
There's a scene in Pinocchio where Geppetto wishes on a star. Right? And what it means is he lifts up his eyes beyond the horizon to something transcendent, to something ultimate, because that's what a star is. It's part of the eternity of the night sky. And so he lifts his eyes up above his daily concerns and he says, what I want what I want more than anything else is that my creation will become a genuine individual, right? It's a heroic gesture because it's so unlikely, and that catalyzes the puppet's transformation into a real being, and we start as puppets. And so the trick is to get rid of your goddamn strings. And you remember in Pinocchio, he faces a lot of temptations. One is to be a liar. The other is to be a neurotic victim. That's how he ends up in Pleasure Island, where he just about gets sold into the salt mines, turns into a brain jackass and sold to the salt mines because it's run by authoritarians. Well, okay, so what you do is you lift up your eyes and you say, look, I would like being to progress in the best possible manner. And that's best for me, best for my family, best for society, maybe best for the world. Simultaneously, I would like to attain that. Whatever that is, that's what I want. You commit to that. Then you tell the truth. And then you can tell if you're telling the truth. You can tell it physiologically. And so this is something to learn. You watch what you say, and you will find out that some things you say make you come apart. They make you fall apart, and you can feel it. It's physiologically. It's centered in your solar plexus. It's a feeling of chaotic weakness and dissolution. It's a sense of self-betrayal. And then if you tell the truth, that pulls you together and strengthens you. And so you can learn to feel when your words are accurately articulating yourself. And then you practice that. And that makes you into the sort of person that won't be an Auschwitz guard, that won't play ideological games, that won't sacrifice other people to their expediency. And that's what you have to do. And that's really the core idea in Western civilization, is to build yourself into a forthright individual who's capable of telling the truth and capable of bearing the responsibilities of citizenry. And that's what people have to do.
Well,
so there you have it. That's where he's come from. And it's for deep philosophical and theological reason that he takes free speech so serious. He literally says in other videos that you can't even think until you get to speak. The speaking is what helps you even to start the process of thinking. You don't really know what you think until you start speaking it out loud. And then you can dialogue with others as well and really test out your ideas. If it just stays in your head, you don't really know. You really aren't grappling with your thoughts. So this is it's an issue he takes serious for not light reasons. So I found him inspiring. Once I saw that video, I'm like, okay, I gotta follow this guy. And I caught up on the other videos that featured him, and it just grew. Now, if you read a lot of the comments, especially in those earlier videos, he developed a following pretty quickly, and some of his followers got kind of sycophantic and just almost like cultic. And like, I don't hang on every word he says. Like, I really appreciate him, but there's still some differences. He's not a Christian. And he still is trying to operate, for the most part, within a materialistic framework, and kind of agnostic still. So there's some philosophical differences, but I can really appreciate where he's coming from and how he's been more of an ally than anything. So, and the best part is he's going against the current narrative. And he's been a figurehead for the anti-PC movement, a voice against radical feminism and radical leftism. So he's going against what's currently happening in our culture. That's really what's driving the polarity politically, even though he's not playing a political game as much. He's commenting on politics. So So obviously then he's gotten everything thrown at him. So he's ruffled up all the feathers, and the mainstream media, the only one that'll play anything with him will be Fox News. Like, everyone else just ignores him. But he did do an interview on Channel 4 in the UK with Kathy Newman, and that was probably the most mainstream exposure he got at that point. And that became quite a big deal. So let me play a clip from that as well.
Let me move on to another debate that's been very controversial for you. And this is, you got in trouble for refusing to call trans men and women by their preferred personal pronouns.
No,
I want to
that's
ask-
not actually true. I got in trouble because I said I would not follow the compelled speech dictates of the federal and provincial government. I actually never got in trouble for not calling anyone anything.
Right.
That didn't
You
happen.
wouldn't follow the change of law, which was designed
Not
to
once it was
outlaw
law.
discrimination.
No.
Why
Yeah, well,
should
that's what
your-
they said it was designed to do.
Okay, you cited freedom of speech in that. Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You know, like, you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable.
Well, I'm very glad I put you on the spot.
Well,
I'm
you
very
get
glad that I have
but you get
exercised my freedom of
point.
speech.
You get my point. It's like you're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell's going on.
So
And
do
that
you-
is what you should do. But
and
you're
you
exercising
think-
your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me. And that's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned.
So you haven't sat there and I'm just trying to work that out. I mean,
Ha, gotcha.
you have got me. I'm trying to work
about
that through in
time.
my head. Yeah. It took a while.
It did, yeah.
Took a while. You
That is like the one time someone being interviewed by one of those gotcha journalists actually got the journalists. So that clip has spread everywhere, or at least it should have. So once again, just one of those reasons. And he's done some commentary, and there's some other ways he could have went with that interview, instead of maybe be more therapeutic with her instead of going for the gotcha moment there. But that was just brilliant, and watch that whole interview. It's so good. So I'll put the links up for that. So like I said, I've been following this guy since as early as possible. Once he started speaking out against Bill C-16, which has since passed. It's crazy. So, and I've been trying to talk to other people about him, and guys in my Bible study and stuff. And so, when he announced he was going on a book tour, I didn't think I'd be able to afford it to go, but I was like, what are the odds I might be able to actually see Dr. Peterson speak? And so he was going to go to Philadelphia. Actually, it was in Upper Darby. And so I'm like, cool, I'm going. Tickets weren't too bad, about $50. I couldn't afford the VIP ones. VIP ones were where you actually could do a meet and greet with him and ask him a question. This one was just you're part of the huge crowd. So, yeah, I wish back in the early days, because he started Patreon, in the early days, if you donate a certain amount, then you could do a Skype interview with him. And I wish I would have gotten in on that. Now he's too in demand. His status has rocketed up. So I sent out invitation to some friends who might want to join me. So I had my buddy Kyle and Brandon come with me. And the place was packed. I mean, this guy is selling out theaters. He sold out this theater where he was doing his biblical lecture series. Like, 12 weeks, who would think someone announcing they're going to talk about the book of Genesis would sell it out? It was insane. So there's that. Now he's doing his book tour on 12 Rules for Life, and sold out that theater. And he gets accused of just reaching to men or to white audiences, and there's always a mix. It was a huge mix of people, different colors, ages, male and female. But he used to sort of like try to say, well, no, there's women that come, and stats show that there's a growing number of women that come to my lectures. But a more recent interview is like, you know what, forget about it. Yeah, men are coming to hear me speak, and there's nothing wrong with that. Men need to hear this message because they're being told they don't matter, and they need to start taking on responsibility. And that's basically his message is he's got a deeper message, not just about free speech, but about meaning. That what's more important than your happiness and your rights is taking on responsibility. And as you take on a responsibility for yourself and then others within your family and then your community and further out, as you do that, as you sort yourself out, it's another term he uses a lot, that's where meaning comes from. So he sparks so much for me, and I've been devouring his content so much that it's almost hard to tell where Peterson ends and I begin in some ways because of how much I've been absorbing from him. And then I had the awesome opportunity in the fall of 2017 to be an adjunct professor at the University of Valley Forge to teach Introduction to Psychology. And so in preparation for that, I watched all of Peterson's lectures, and I was able to incorporate him into my curriculum. And because in his Massive Meaning course, he explains Jean Piaget in ways I've never heard before. And you just think of him as this guy who came up with some child developmental stages. But man, he was brilliant in other ways that no one ever really pointed out until I started watching Peterson. So I took clips from some of those lectures and I played them to my class. And like his ideas have been integrated into my counseling. So he's had a huge impact on me. So I introduced him to some friends. Now they're at least aware of who he is. I'm just trying to get the rest of the Christian community to be aware and dialogue and see what he's helping us do in some ways, even as someone who's sort of got one foot in the secular, sort of materialistic, atheist world and another foot in Christianity. So he's playing this delicate tightrope walk. But he's doing us a lot of favors in some ways. So anyway, without further ado, I just got footage from the Q&A portion. I wasn't able to get much more than that. And there's probably just one other question at the end I wasn't able to get because I ran out of memory on my phone. But I got most of it. So here's a little bonus treat for people. And think about this. This is back in May of 2018. So he actually dropped some information here on the tour that we previously didn't know about, like about his autoimmune disorder. Like that was kind of new information, and about just some other personal information about himself that he revealed. So here you go.
Well, let's start talking about a porn star. You see what I'm saying? People, big things are happening. All right, so we're going to do a Q&A. You guys submitted literally hundreds of questions on Slido, so we're going to bust that out. And Jordan looks like he's ready to roll. You ready to roll, my friend? Guys, one more time for Jordan Peterson, everybody. All right, my man. I've got your computer here with your password. I can end this whole thing tonight. Where'd we go? Where'd we go on Slido? That's a lot of trust he has in me. How you feeling?
Good. Yeah. Great to be here to talk to you. I'm really happy about it. It's a crazy thing that you're all here.
Isn't it nice to keep showing up?
It's really something to see people, all sorts of people, come out and think about things deeply. You know? Obviously, there's a need for that, right? A desire for it, a hunger for it, and thank God for that. That's such a good thing.
All right, we got a lot of questions here. I tried to do it in some level of importance. This one seems like number one. When will you be doing a duet with Kanye West?
You don't want to hear me sing.
Yeah. You know, I'm going to ask you this 1 second, and I don't think this guy's name has come up once in any of the shows that we've done. What do you think of Trump? I literally, we've been doing this for weeks now. I don't think his name has come up once.
Well, that shows you how political this is. It's something that's really, I'll get to the Trump question here right away. It's something that's really struck me, watching the way the media has been responding to whatever it is that I'm doing. There's this chronic insistence that it's political, because we're in a situation now where people think that everything is political. There isn't a reality that isn't political. And so I kept trying to interest journalists in the idea that the people who are watching my lectures might have been attracted there initially because of a political scandal, although I never thought the scandals I was in were particularly political to begin with. But that isn't why they're staying there. And that isn't why people come to these talks. They come to the talks because, as far as I can tell, that's what everyone tells me, they're trying to put their lives together. And that's not political. It's like the journalists I talk to, they can't believe that that could even be a possibility. It doesn't fit. There isn't a corner of reality where that might be true. That all that people are trying to do is to contend with their unhappiness and make things better. In some way, not in a radical, wave a placard in the air, have a celebration sort of way, but just actually trying to make things a little better. And the reason that this is so wonderful for me is because that is what I think it is. And that's what people keep telling me when they meet me. And so I think that there couldn't be anything better than that. And I don't think that it's political. And I'm thrilled to death that you're here, that this is working. And so now on to Trump.
That's what you did there.
Here's what I think about Trump. Okay? I went and saw John Cleese in Toronto about 3 weeks ago. And I love John Cleese. When I was an unhappy teenager and I watched Monty Python and the Flying Circus, I couldn't even believe it existed. It was so ridiculous and so comical and so absurd. And I loved The Life of Brian and The Holy Grail. And so John Cleese came to talk to us in Toronto. And he spent 20 minutes talking about Trump. And I thought, and then he talked about The Life of Brian and the set and what happened with Monty Python and the fact that George Harrison funded his movies. And that was really cool because nobody else could tell that story but John Cleese. But I didn't care what he thought about Donald Trump. Because what he thought about Donald Trump just made it more interesting than whatever any of you think about Donald Trump. And that's what I think about my opinion about Donald Trump. It's like, who cares what I think about Donald Trump? That's how it started. I don't know what to think about it. He's your goddamn president. There's a reason I started this question, answering this question with the discussion about this being political. It's like, I don't think I'm in any position to say anything particularly intelligent about Trump. There's nothing that you couldn't hear from 100 other people, and so go ask them. You don't have to pay this and that. Just go ask them on the street. They'll tell you. So, I don't know what to think of him. He's a strange guy, man. He's not a strange guy. Looks like it's endemic.
I love it. BuzzFeed headline tomorrow, Jordan Peterson, he's your goddamn president. Here's an important one. Why do you sound like Kermit the Frog?
It's probably because I haven't trained my voice very well. If I spoke properly, it would be down about here. And I would put my voice down farther into my body. But I'm a bit nervous.
And so it tends to be up here where it should be. So if I had more courage, it would be lower. But I haven't managed that yet. So, however, if you have to be compared to a Muppet, then better Kermit than Miss Piggy. It's important, I think. Now I'm going to try not to sound like Kermit. One of the things that I very much like about what's happening around me, and it's partly why Dave is with me, is because it's really good when there's some humor about things, even when they're serious, right? Something that doesn't have humor, I think, is deadly. You have to be careful, which is why it's a terrible thing that comedians won't go on university campuses now. That's not a good thing. And I've been watching all the memes and everything that people have been generating about them. Well, not all of them, but I've watched some of them. And I've been using them kind of as a barometer because they're poking fun at me all the time. And it's good-hearted. It's just satirical. It's just teasing, you know? And I'm watching it and trying to go along with the joke like a good Englishman, because English comedians are very, very good at allowing themselves to be made fun of. It's something I really admire about. Us Canadians aren't too bad about that either. We've produced a lot of good comics. And so I'm really happy that there's this comedic element. And it's good that Dave's along with me as far as I'm concerned, because he brings some intelligent levity to this situation. And the Kermit thing is the same thing. It's like, and it's also people checking me out to see if I can take a joke, you know, and if, so far I seem to be able to have taken a joke. Well, that's good, you know, and so far I think because I've been able to take a joke and I played along with it, and repeated the joke back, the teasing has remained benign. And I think that's a good indication that I'm not doing anything that's dangerous. And I don't want to do anything that's wrong, you know, if I can help it. And so, I sound like Kermit because I don't keep my voice down where it belongs. But it's okay because it's funny.
That's a good one. Do you have any advice for people who have seen too much on psychedelics?
Well, the first advice I would have would be lay the hell off. But seriously, you know, Carl Jung wrote about psychedelics. I didn't know that until a couple of months ago. He was still alive when Aldous Huxley and the crew on the West Coast was starting to experiment with LSD and mescaline. And Jung said, beware of unearned wisdom. He was very smart. And he said some specific things about hallucinogens that I thought were very interesting. He said, they can, when you find out things that you're not ready to know, you might end up with a responsibility that's bigger than you can handle. And I think that that's a very good caution with regards to psychedelics. People should be very careful with psychedelics. We don't know what the hell they are, and they warp the fabric of reality, those things. You know, if you've been unlucky in your experimentation, then I would say stay away and nail your feet back down to the ground and start to act in the world at a more mundane and practical level until your head cools off. Get the little things right, you know, and beware of stealing fire from the gods.
What kind of car do you drive?
I have a great car, actually. Last year, I've been very ill for about 2 years. And I'm feeling much better, thank God.
You want to talk about it, Chris? Because we talked about it privately a little bit. I don't know how.
Well, there's some strange autoimmune problem that runs in my family that's quite deep, and it really nailed my daughter, but to be happy, I would say, for probably 2 years, something like that. So it's quite yeah, I'm looking forward to it because I've been dragging myself through all this. Like I've been, I would say about 3/4 dead for about the last 2 years. And that's no exaggeration. It really isn't. And so I'm really looking forward to how I could give these talks if I was actually healthy. So, anyways, last year I had a stressful couple of years, although there's been a lot of it was good. And last year I thought, well, I'm going to do something fun. And my brother-in-law, who's quite a character, had a pretty nice car. I used to drive it when I would visit him. He had an exceptionally nice car. It was a Mercedes SL 550, 12-cylinder. And wow. It's a hardtop convertible, light, beautiful car, heavy, super fast. And he lent it to his nephew, and his nephew parked it on the side of the road to go help someone else who would be in a car accident. Someone came along and totaled it. So, yeah, but anyways, I thought I could buy it. I didn't buy the 12-cylinder. They're like something to save on the money. And I bought an old one. It's 2007. But it was in good shape. It had about 50,000 kilometers on it. And I got it for about the same price you'd pay for, a mid-level sedan. It wasn't expensive. And it has a great sound system. And so now I can drive around when I have a little bit of spare time. I can talk down and listen to loud dinosaur rock, which I like to do. I've enjoyed that. It's an amazing car, and so I like driving around. I grew up in northern Alberta, and the distances there are immense. Like we live 400 miles from the nearest city, and we drive there. My parents have a cabin in northern Canada. It's 1,200 miles away. So yeah, so we were in cars all the time. So I like driving around and listening to loud music, and so now I have a school car that my son mostly drives now.
Do you believe in aliens? We're mixing it up tonight, I'm keeping you on your toes.
You'd think an easy answer to that would just be no, wouldn't you? Yeah, I think we'll just go with no. I read an interesting article.
Yeah. I gotta stop with that.
Mathematician did an analysis of how long it would take aliens to colonize the galaxy. He was trying to figure out if there were aliens. He figured that an intelligent species could colonize the entire galaxy in about 1 million years. And that the galaxy is several billion years old, and so the fact that there aren't aliens everywhere indicates that there probably aren't aliens anywhere. That was his theory, because it only takes 1 million years. There's 1,000 periods of 1 million years in any given billion years, and so it's kind of like, is there life on Mars? If there was life on Mars, you wouldn't have to look for it. Life isn't something that only exists in a cave, a mile underground. If there's life, it's everywhere. And I kind of think the same thing about it.
So that was all the footage I was able to get on my phone, but when I got home and I remembered I jotted down some notes in my notebook when I was at the lecture of the other things from the Q&A time. So one of the other questions was, how far will the left go before imploding? And his answer was pretty much that we don't want to see the left implode. Because he's, like I said, he's a classical liberal, so he comes from the point of view that both left and right are needed, that we need both, and that there's a purpose for both left and right. Now the left is getting a little too far left, way too far left now. So what he's saying now is what we want are reasonable liberals to wake up, and we have to understand that we're divided in the West, particularly in the U.S. It's almost 50-50. So we don't want to defeat the other side, because he likens it to a marriage. You get in an argument with your wife, you don't want victory in that you defeat your wife, because then you're married to a loser, and you want peace, and so you want to come to actual reconciliation. So that's where he's coming from when it comes to the culture war. The other question was about what to do about bad press, which he had a number of hit pieces about him. This was in May, so it was May 23rd that this lecture, and so by then he had a hit piece in like the New York Times, NBC, Vice. Some of them were in newspapers, some were videos, and so he was constantly on the defensive with some of these hit pieces, and some of them were just ridiculous. And he just pretty much it takes him some time to decompress after some of these interviews where the interviewers just got an agenda, and his answer to the question was pretty much, by their fruits you will know them. So they're coming at him, they're saying things about him. It's like, keep checking out the rest of his content and what his message has been, and by his fruit you'll know if what they're saying about him is true or false, as well as check out what the message of these people who are slandering him, pretty much, what that leads to and what their fruit is. So and then the final question was about what he thinks of the term the intellectual dark web. So this is what birthed out of the Jordan Peterson phenomenon, was other intellectuals and professors and people in academia who pretty much got disavowed from the left. That's pretty much what the intellectual dark web, or at least the elites, the ones who have a platform, really are those who have always been on the left, but because the left got too far left and became too radical, they didn't feel like they could relate to them anymore, and they still believed in free speech, and they just wanted to have a dialogue or whatever. They wanted to be able to discuss big ideas, and they were finding that the way the universities were going and the media was going, that was not being tenable anymore. So you had people like Jordan Peterson, of course, Sam Harris, Eric Weinstein, Brett Weinstein, which Brett Weinstein had his own big, at least 15 minutes of fame when he got kicked out of Evergreen State University. So that was shortly after Jordan Peterson's big moment. Then you had Evergreen. So that's another video. You can look up stuff about Brett Weinstein. Dave Rubin, who's like the talk show host of the intellectual dark web. And some others who have been pretty much always either libertarians or liberals who are finding that they need to sort of unite in order to be able to protect free speech and utilize free speech to discuss big ideas. So Eric Weinstein was the one who coined the term intellectual dark web. And so it was kind of new at the time of this tour. And so Jordan just sort of gave some thoughts. He's like, well, I don't know about the name so much, but it seems to have stuck. It's kind of weird. He's like, we don't really have, all the people that are considered part of the intellectual dark web, he's like, we don't really have a whole lot in common. He's like, and it's funny because him and Sam Harris, two of the top guys in the intellectual dark web, ended up doing a series of debates or discussions on theism versus atheism, or religion versus atheism. And so it's like they don't have a whole lot, they really disagree on some very fundamental issues, but they do agree on free speech, and that's the main thing. They want to be able to have these discussions. So if anything, that the Jordan Peterson phenomenon has helped create opportunity for more discussion. One of my fears is that with the intellectual dark web being mostly comprised of former liberals or people on the left who just have been disavowed by the left, that the discussion is going to exclude true conservatives and Christians. The only really religious person that's like in the main hub of the intellectual dark web is Ben Shapiro, and he's an Orthodox Jew. you don't see any true evangelical Christians that have really been accepted into the intellectual dark web. And you can almost say that anyone who's in the alternative media who likes to discuss big ideas, they could be considered in the intellectual dark web. But it's there's sort of like an upper echelon. There's going to be a hierarchy. Whenever there's any sort of group, there's going to be a hierarchy. And Jordan Peterson's right at the top. And he straddles that line, like I've been saying. He's not fully a person of faith, but he is a respecter of Christianity, and he's on his journey. So I am confident if he continues on his journey, before he dies, he's going to be a Christian. What type? Who knows? I don't care. So I'm just excited to see where things go. So that was the Q&A. I was most looking forward to the Q&A at the event, especially since this particular event was a week after him doing the monk debate, which you can look that up. That was him and Stephen Fry up against Michael Eric Dyson and I forget her name. It was another lady who was a editor at New York Times, debating political correctness. So going back to his roots with that debate, and that was a very frustrating debate because they're just talking around each other. They weren't actually talking about political correctness that much. So I was hoping someone would have asked him about that, but they didn't. So there are some dumb questions and there's some good ones. As far as the main lecture, he just pretty much talked about the 12 rules for life and talked up through rule number 12. Up through rule number 8. So he got through most of them and gave a lot of his own commentary. But if you already were familiar with his book or the other lectures, it was a lot of rehashing. So I was most looking forward to the Q&A time. But overall, it was an amazing experience. Just being able to see the crowd, be part of the energy that was there, and introduce some of my friends to his work. And I had a nice drive with my friend Brandon, and we got to talk about him on the way there and a little more on the way back. So it was a great time. That was one of my highlights from this summer, or 2018 in general. So another long video, I know. I didn't want to just jump into the 12 Rules for Life tour without giving an introduction to who Jordan Peterson is for some of my friends who might follow me, who haven't really jumped into all this material and figured out who he is. So there you go. You could use this, share this with others as a good intro to who he is. Anyway, if you like this content and want to see more, please subscribe, like, join the conversation with me. I look forward to meeting you in the comment section. All right, God bless.